philosophy is the glue that holds together all the rest of academia. Today, I brought to you something special, something experimental. Today, a philosopher friend of mine is going to challenge the following longevity athletes. First, Julie Gibson Clark, the OG longevity athlete. Daniel Lewis, number 3 on the Rejuvenation Olympics, and Mike Lustgarten, number 1 on the Longevity World Cup. They may not look like it, but they are all over 100 years old, and some of them even fought in World War II. Now, joining today our host, Said Sayan, a philosopher and AI governance specialist dedicated to exploring the ethical and existential dimensions of emerging technologies. With a PhD in philosophy from MIT and a postdoctoral research at Harvard, Said serves as the executive director of the Society's Sapiens. Today, he'll guide us through a nuanced exploration of death, immortality, and radical longevity, prompting our athletes and listeners alike to critically reflect on what it genuinely means to pursue the indefinite extension of human life. I met him in Prospera, a free city-state in Roatan, Honduras, where like-minded individuals gather, meaning crazy ones. But with all that said, Said, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Adam, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very curious to hear the views of longevity athletes on whether that is actually bad. So why attempt to avoid death? Why attempt to extend life? Why is that bad? And one of the puzzles of the badness of death is that bad for whom? If you're dead, you are no more. If you are no more, there's nothing that can be bad to you. You can't get any headaches, you can't get any pain. And being dead itself is something where implies your non-existence. If you don't exist, then for whom is it bad? And why avoid it?
So there are two things there. One is you said death is the end. That's debatable. There's no evidence, right? Short that that's a big debate, isn't it? Right? You've got the theists and atheists, right? And maybe even stuff in between, agnostics.
So we can define the term in this way. Death is like when you cease to exist. Suppose that there is an afterlife. The idea is that if there is such a thing as death, then the afterlife also would have an ending. But the question that I'm asking you, suppose that there is nothing after, that there's an end point to your existence. Is there something bad about that? So that's the question. We can talk about afterlife later on. So to give you a little bit of a preview, first of all, I'm going to ask about, is death bad? And if so, why? Secondly, is there an afterlife? Because as you noted, that assumes that there is no afterlife. And are we postponing an afterlife that might be very good? And lastly, I want to also discuss as to whether or not death itself could be a good thing. So though that's kind of the arc of the discussion that I have organized for you. So, but to start, suppose that there is such a thing as death, and why avoid it if it by definition means that you do not exist? What's bad about it?
So I don't even, I know I talk about risk of death for all causes in almost all my videos, but I basically don't think about death at all. I'm focused on the other side of that, which is I can't stand the idea of aging and functional decline. I want to be as youthful as possible at any chronological age. I don't want to be good for my chronological age. I want to be, as good as I physically can be, regardless of chronological age. So I look at it from the other side. It's not necessarily avoiding death. It's, even though that's a part of the equation, it's staying as healthy and functional for as long as physically possible.
Okay, so it's rather more you avoid the process of dying. That's what you want to avoid, and then therefore you're avoiding death. Daniel or Julie, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah. So I want to jump in there. So like I'm watching my parents, my mom with Parkinson's and my dad with dementia, and I think my reality is I'm not trying to avoid death, and in fact I think like my brother died when, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago. And like, that was like the greatest gift to me to understand like that we only have a certain amount of time. Like I need that darkness to make this life like a lot more light. but I want to make sure that all the years that I spend here are maximally strong and vibrant, and I'm not, you know, in such a disability that I can't be out in the world and doing things. And I think there are examples of people, you know, yogis and things like this that, you know, they live vibrant lives until maybe the last year or something to that effect. And I just, I feel like, and I'm, you know, a Catholic, so it's like I believe like death is gonna happen and all of that, but God gave me this body, so I'm gonna do the best I can with everything I know that's out there. I can't unsee all the things I've learned about longevity and keeping our body as healthy as possible, and I feel like that's like a gift from God and a responsibility to take care of this one. Like, when my brother died, I just remember thinking, like, 1, I know he's still there with me. I feel him and see him all the time. And but in this life, when you have a body, like, you're able to eat ice cream and to dance and to hear music and to experience all the pleasures that a body brings you. And then death comes, and it's not that you don't, in my beliefs, you know, that you don't exist. It's just that you can't experience the pleasure of living, I suppose. And so I want that to last as long as possible. And who knows what that may be.
I agree with both Julie and Michael. I'm not really concerned about death. I'm not trying to live for as long as possible. I don't think I would want to live for 1,000 years, even if I had the option. I'm just trying to stay as healthy as I can for as long as I can, make the most of the time I have available. And if I can make it to 120 in great health, having lived a full life, having done lots of fun things, and then just suddenly die in my sleep, I'd be really happy with that result.
So there's something that you said, Daniel, there in your response, where you said that you if you could live for 1,000 years, you would rather not. But then you also said you would try to live for as long as possible.
We'll stay healthy for as long as possible.
Suppose
So-
you can stay healthy for 1,000 years, would you do it?
That was smart of you to catch that. My concern is that after 1,000 years, I would have done everything there is to do, and I would just be really bored. Maybe then if we could go to a new planet, I'd want to stay alive longer and explore that planet. But at 1,000, maybe it's time to just let nature take its course and see what's on the other side.
So I would live to at least 1,000. So again, not even thinking about death, whatever as long as physically possible is. I mean, even the sun, you know, will heat death of the universe at some point, right? So whatever the maximum is that I can physically get to, I would want to get there. I wouldn't be bored at all. There isn't enough time in the day for me. I mean, I get other people may disagree, but for me, there isn't enough time in the day. I want to live infinitely as long as I can.
So that's an interesting point of view, Michael, because suppose you live 500 years, and suppose that human memory is not, you can be as healthy as you like, but you're not going to be remembering things in the same way you did, say 100 years into the future, 200, 300 years. So there can be this discontinuity in the set of memories that are the ones that inform you, your personality, your way of thinking, your way of behaving. And it could be that you might have one body, but from a sort of personal identity standpoint, as to like what makes you who you are, that might change across that single lifetime. So maybe when you say you're living for as long as you can, maybe the person who's saying that now is not the same person who says that 800 years from now.
Oh, I don't think it'll ever change. This is in my DNA. And the things that I would forget, I'd be dumping things that wouldn't be useful and filling my brain with other things that were useful for that time. So
But suppose literally there are no memories that you've formed like right now and in the past throughout your entire life. And in the 100 years, you've lost all of those memories. So you have nothing like from your current age to your birth. You lost all of that memory. So do you think that you would still be the same person?
that
There
assumes,
simply because you share a body?
I mean, that assumes that I haven't maintained that youthful brain age state and that there's some.
No, not necessarily.
So it's
Not
the-
necessarily.
So it's theoretical, isn't it, right? Because is there a condition where someone in a health, 50 plus years, and I don't think my memory's bad. I don't see why that would change all of a sudden 500 years from now where I have selective memory. That's some functional, brain issue.
So no, it's not so much that it would change. The idea is that because it's such a large expanse of time, and this is not the normal period or expanse of time over which the human brain remembers things, you're going to be missing much more. Just to give you an idea, people consider there are certain people who remember almost absolutely everything. I forget what the condition is, but medicine considers those cases pathological and maladaptive. And actually being able to forget certain things can be adaptive. And that's why most of us tend to forget a lot of things. So the question is, if we were to extend life very, very to 500 or 800 years, given that the natural way in which memory works, we would lose chunks of our lives. And is that something that you would be happy with as long as your body continues, even if all of these experiences that you want to continue, you end up remembering as you go through life? You end up forgetting as you go through life.
Yeah. So this brings up the concept of the self, and I'm happy to let it go. Let's fast forward 500 years, and instead of being obsessed with biomarkers and diet tracking and all the things I'm obsessed with in terms of maximizing health and longevity, all of that stuff is just a given. AI crunches all the numbers. I don't have to think about it at all. I don't have to remember it at all. Now I can dump some of those memories, even though I don't formally memorize them. They're just a part of who I am and the self, right? So I'm happy to dump parts of my memory that are unnecessary and don't contribute to whatever my goals are 500 years from now or whenever it may be, and to lose some aspect of self and evolve into something else, at that chronologically older age.
Fair enough. Any thoughts on that, Julie, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of think like, I mean, I agree with you to a certain extent that yes, okay, we're gonna we're gonna lose certain memories, and like Michael's saying, like a lot of stuff is gonna be automated, so I won't have to remember how to do X, Y, and Z. But like who I am, I think that ribbon continues because I'm still that same DNA is gonna exist throughout entirety of when I live. So I don't know. I mean, I get that idea almost like these are all the decisions I'm making from the person I am now, and clearly that would have been very different when I was like 2 years old and when I was, 30 years old. I'm making different decisions now, so I'm certain I will make different decisions and have different ideas based on my experience, say, in 100 years, and hopefully they're wiser because I've just that much more wiser. So, but that DNA is still gonna be there, that the thing that you see in somebody's eyes, like that soul, everybody's look is just a little different, and we can see it from the time they're 1 years old I mean, I can look at pictures of my son when he was a baby, and now at 18, he's still that same energy is still there. And that's, I guess, what I'm talking about, like that's still gonna be there.
So I guess it might be helpful to draw a few distinctions. So we can say, for instance, that you would be the same human animal years of age. And the question is, are you still the same person? Where you can think of the person as like the software that the human body is running. And to give you an example, and this one involves the deterioration of the brain, there's this very famous case of Phineas Gage from neuroscience, which is this person who was working on the rail track. There was some accident, and he had a railroad a spike go through his head and off into the air, several feet into the air. And from that, he was very responsible. He was a very good guy, very immoral. All of that went away because it affected his prefrontal cortex specifically. But this is an example where people would say even the look in his eyes changed after that. So it tells you that there's a very, very tight connection between the person and the human body. And what I'm suggesting is, well, what if you live so long that you can actually distinguish from the sort of personal, like the conditions that distinguish one person from another, not only apply you versus me, but apply to you now and to you in the future 800 years from now. But there's this question, there's clearly, whether or not there's a soul, there's a very tight connection between the brain and the personality, the person, etc.
Yeah, I've always found that case study really unsettling, because the idea that I could sustain an injury and just become a totally different person, become maybe even an evil person, it's just very disturbing. But because we can change so much over time, I'm taking a wait and see approach. So when I get to 100, I'll assess. I'll constantly be assessing the available options for longevity, and then balancing them against how I am now as a person, whether I have close relationships because I think it'd be very sad to live for a long time and be eventually without family and friends if none of your family and friends choose to go on that journey with you and you're not able to make new connections going forward. So it's just a series of trade-offs for me.
That also brings up the question, like if you're like a 500-year-old person and you're the only 500-year person, even if you do have all your memories and we have all of those issues set aside, can you really, you know, can you really connect with people who are 400 years younger than you?
Yeah,
Like,
which
what would be that experience like that individual would have that it might mark a difference? You might feel some sort of empathy because they're also human beings. You can share some of their experiences, but in a sense, you're alone in having that much experience, and no one, and that's just a fact about your existence at that point. Yeah, Michael.
so it comes with evolution of personality and interest, right? So if I get to, or if anyone gets to 500 and they're isolated and doesn't consider society or their value to society, maybe that would be, depressing, right, at the individual level. But on the other hand, if you're an active member of society, you pay attention to what people are doing, you offer value. I don't see it like that at all. And there are always going to be people who judge. I couldn't care less about them. There are always going to be people on the other side of that fence, that 50-50 coin, right? Where you've got people who don't like what you're doing, and then the other half who do like what you're doing, right? So there's always going to be a segment of the population that 500-year-old person will get along with, even if it's a very small bubble. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, isn't the saying like you only need about like 5 friends, So I'm sure there'll be 5 of us out there. Um, so in that sense, but also, yeah, I mean, I think it's one of these things you're just gonna have to reassess on a decade by decade by decade basis as you move forward, you know. I mean, some decades are really, really tough and some decades are really, really great. And, who knows? Who knows what will come in front of you, but that's the beauty of the adventure of life, right?
Yeah, and so to sum up at least some part of the discussion, in a sense, whether being dead is bad or not is not necessarily important to longevity athletes because the process of dying is bad. And by virtue of staying as healthy as possible, you are able to stave off those obvious sources of ill, say the actual process of dying or living unhealthily, etc. So that's one of the takeaways that I take from this. A second one, which I thought was interesting, is I guess there's some sort of confidence that the community as a whole, the longevity athlete community, might be able to persist significantly. Let's say one of the people who are participating in this, say, experiment right now, are live to 500. There's this maybe hope or expectation that it wouldn't be just them; there would be a group. But I guess I was just trying to highlight that. Well, what if it's not? And would that be like a a, a a desirable sort of outcome? And I guess Michael said if you're still integrating to say it in the right way, you would be, but perhaps others might think it's depressing. And another thing that I find interesting is that I want to get a little bit more of your view on whether or not you think that death is a solvable engineering problem. Because actually, a lot of this discussion brings back memory about the mythical philosopher's stone, which is this stone that through alchemical processes not only turned base metals into noble metals like lead into gold, but also helped reverse aging, gave immortality, had a whole set of features that were coveted and that for hundreds of years people tried and pursued. And they all viewed that as a solvable engineering problem. And I was wondering, like, your confidence that it is a solvable engineering problem is where is it? Where would you say it's based, or what would be your view on it? If maybe you're not confident in that position.
Wait, can I go back because you're talking about the process of dying is
Yeah.
bad. I don't like. I think if I wanted to summarize how I feel like it's the process of life I want to slow down as much as possible, and the process of death I want to speed up as much as possible so that that's like, you know, less than a year. Because like right now we're looking at the process of death taking 2, 3, 4 decades, people's slow decline, and that's just absolutely intolerable to me. So it's not so much the process of death that I fear or don't want. It's just that I want that to be as quick as possible. So, that the number of years I'm here are all, vibrant and strong. So I just wanted to clear that up. And then the other, is it an engineering problem? I actually think, honestly, yeah, I think that we're gonna figure this out somehow. Like, I do think that, this whole, like, longevity escape velocity, I don't think we're gonna get there as quickly as some people are predicting, but I do think, 100, couple 100 years in the future, maybe a lot sooner, but I do think we're figuring this out.
Yeah, I think it is an engineering problem that can be solved. I think the fact that there are certain animals in nature that have evolved um, negligible senescence and are able to regenerate and live you know, potentially forever, if in the right conditions. The fact that nature can produce that on its own, although it's really, really rare, I think suggests that us with our own intelligence and our own biochemical engineering capabilities could someday achieve the same for us. But I don't know what the cost of that might be. It may require lots of gene therapies and interventions that we can't even contemplate right now, but I think it's possible.
Yeah. So for me, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So aging is a biochemical process that can either be, it's a pretty constant slope. You can speed that slope up in terms of how quickly you die with poor diet, poor lifestyle, all the things, smoking, whatever. Or you can potentially even slow it down, but with death still happening, right? So then the other side of that coin is, what's the slope of scientific knowledge? Is it equivalent to the slope of aging, to that constant slope of aging? Or are we down here, just primitive monkeys throwing rocks at X, Y, and Z, trying to hope it works? If we're down here, it's not 50 years, it's not 100 years, maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's a million years. But eventually those two slopes will match. Uh, I wish I could say I was optimistic, but that's a big part of my approach, which is, do all I can with the live long enough to potentially live forever, and hope that we're in that 70-year of my potential remaining lifespan to get there with the slopes match. And now aging is flat, and it's, there is no death because, we can solve aging as quickly as it happens.
It sounds from the discussion so far that perhaps, maybe not in the case of Daniel, but perhaps, say it is a solvable engineering problem, there's a question as to whether or not we should accept the solutions presented to us simply because they solve for human death. So what I have in mind is, like, say we do solve the problem by having the approach of detaching the head of a human and replacing it with a new body, and that's kind of the only sort of solution. Is that an acceptable solution, or would it be maybe mind uploading into a machine, or maybe replacing parts of your body by machines until you're completely robotic? So there are these different possible solutions, and the question is, are each of those equally desirable simply because they solve for human death, or no? Does it matter to you how it gets solved?
I think it'll be a very personal decision that has to be made by each individual. I know for me, I would be okay with maybe one or two cybernetic limbs, but I wouldn't want to become almost entirely robot. I'd draw the line there. I wouldn't want to upload my mind to the cloud. I may be okay with, I would definitely be okay with gene therapies or anything that works with my natural biology. So I think everyone's going to have their own risk reward trade off.
And I'd say I'm the same as Daniel, except for I wouldn't mind, like, uploading my mind to something, only in the sense of, like, how fantastic would it be to be able to go back and talk to your great 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 grandma, or something like that. So in the sense of familiar history, if family history, like, it would be interesting if there was a way, not necessarily my soul, but just kind of who I am and how I think and my thought patterns and my experiences could be uploaded only for future generations to understand where they came from. I think that would be really cool, but I don't see myself as actually living through that process. I see it more as because it would be limited to, the experiences. At least that's what I would want it to be, is limited to the experience of the life I had here on Earth.
I'm in the same boat mostly as these guys. So I'm not trying to cut my head off and attach it to something else. I think I'd probably be good with cybernetic limbs in a worst case scenario, but I kind of like these flesh, even though they're outdated, cybernetic may be an upgrade. But And then the AI agent, I'm a big fan of that approach. We're already on the verge of that, right? So great grandkids can meet the AI Julie, the AI Mike. I think that's going to be a real thing at some point. So, but others may have a different, a different perspective, right? I know of one person who, based on the obvious, the abundance of data that women live longer than men, and they are in a pro longevity mindset where they don't want to die and they want to live as long as they can. They're taking estrogen. And this is a biological male taking estrogen, and that's their choice, right? I don't choose to do that. It's not how I want to do it. But if others want to detach their head or whatever they think, right? As long as it's not mandated. I don't want to be mandated by some governing body that all of you have to do this to live longer. I don't want that at all. Individual choice is a big part of what I do.
So these scenarios bring up now the question of an afterlife, because in a sense, if you're like switching bodies, or you're now completely a robotic being, then you might be considering that when you were a flesh and bone and blood being, it was like a different life for you then. And we can think about afterlife also from the religious standpoint. And what does it mean for radical longevity? From a theistic standpoint, is it the right decision to try to stave off death for as long as possible, when part of in many religions, part of the idea is that death is like a gateway to this new world, whether it's heaven or it's hell or it's some other alternative. It seems like we're deciding if we want to be if we want to go for the radical longevity, we're deciding not to open the door and go through that door. And is that the right decision? And are there any theists in the group?
But I mean, I guess, like, you mean me believing in the app where they
religious.
sorry, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. So it's funny though, because I just wonder, like, if even those ideas in the next 500 years will evolve and we have, figure out even kind of where the soul goes on some sort of scientific level. I mean, I don't know, who knows? Who knows what we could just, like, would there be a place in which I would go, yeah, not only do I feel my brother, I know he's here because X, Y, and Z, I can understand where his soul goes. So I don't, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. That's one of those things I'll have to just live my way into that answer. And I'm okay with that.
Also, in other religions, there's the go ahead, Daniel. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I should say it's hard to answer because there's so many religions that each teach many different things and contradict each other on different issues, but
And themselves too.
and themselves. But if you the way I look at it is if there is a God and they're responsible for the way I am, then they gave us intelligence and the ability to change our environment and build civilization, and staving off death by prolonging health span and lifespan is just a natural step in the process of using that intelligence. And as long as you use your life to do good and live by the teachings of your God and help other people, then it seems like it should be fine with that God.
100% agree. That's if there is a God or gods or whatever it is, right? I can think of no greater honor than juicing the orange being our existence as much as possible. If we were created, I would want my creation to do that. But then, just like Daniel said, maxing out in terms of also being a good person, all the virtuous things that come with religion or even without religion, just, being moral and all that contributing. But, this idea of the afterlife, we assume that it's some, metaphysical place, but our senses evolved for survival, right? What we see, what we hear, what we taste, touch, this is not the full spectrum of reality, right? Just in terms of magnetism, right? We can't see X-rays, we can't see microwaves, we can't see gamma rays, but they exist, right? We couldn't see microbes at one point, and we couldn't see the stars, from far away. And still, most stars we can't. But the technology gets better all the time with the James Webb, space telescopes and all that, right? So what we perceive as reality is likely not the full spectrum of reality. In fact, it's probably a very small sliver. So is this a matter of, if you've prolonged your stay in this existence, are you doing something bad cosmically because you're supposed to now live in the real reality that exists, the full spectrum of reality, I don't know. I'm very interested in that topic. I've had people on the channel who study the, consciousness and the quantum mechanics relation to the consciousness, because it's all about science for me.
I would also add that there's also this question of reincarnation. According to certain religions, reincarnation is a process of growth that takes you to some equivalent of heaven, or what they call nirvana. And if you're like trying to juice the orange, as you squeeze the orange rather, as you know, then you're kind of like extending one of those steps for much longer than would typically be the case. Maybe eventually it doesn't matter because eventually you'll die. But what if it's something that continues on indefinitely? Then you'll never be able to reach that kind of spiritual optimum. And you're doing that yourself. You're doing that to yourself. And I also wonder, like, what's the right way of squeezing the orange? Because definitely trying to stay as healthy as possible seems to be like the natural and most sort of obvious way to do it. But there are other ways, like cryonics, and you can just try to freeze yourself and preserve yourself for as long as possible until the right kind of technology develops. That's one way of squeezing the orange, but doesn't seem to be as appropriate, or it doesn't have as much in favor of it as the one where you're trying to live as healthily as possible. But your argument, Michael, would seem to support both of those options, or does it?
If the idea is by extending lifespan, you should be in the afterlife at a certain age, and that you're doing something bad because you should be dead and in the afterlife. And with that in mind, suicide, why even be born, right? So
No,
And
the idea is right. Yeah, Julie.
I'm just thinking, like, but what if, like, we figure out, like, kind of Michael was alluding to, like, okay, just because we can't see somebody when they die, like, maybe we actually figure that out. And so maybe you could live those evolutions in one lifetime if you're living 1,000 years. Maybe that nirvana can be achieved just here in this one body. I mean, kind of like, I don't see there's like a master puppeteer up there or a guy in a robe. There is this force, this energy, this creative force that's in our universe. And I think we can all feel it. I mean, it's just like right now, why would I not go jump off a bridge and kill myself? Like, there's a life force in me that wants to keep living. And I think at some point we learn how to, like, work with that, and we understand what happens after. Like, if this creator wants to keep sending these souls back, maybe that's just an very intense creative energy that's out there, and maybe it's no longer necessary when we can live 1,000 years, because now we're kind of doing those evolutions while we live. I mean, it's all, who knows? We don't know the answer to these questions, but that's a possibility.
I agree that what you mentioned, Julie, may be possible, but I guess my point is that the possibility that I'm highlighting is one where you do your damnness to live for as long as possible, and therefore you don't achieve the greatest spiritual heights that you could achieve. And is that something that you're happy with, Michael?
yeah, so that sounds very specific to a religion or a few religions, maybe. I don't know. I don't believe that. I'm not a part of those religions, whichever they are, but there may be people who are. And if that's what they believe and they choose to die at some point because they believe they're supposed to be reincarnated at a later date, go for it. It's all, I don't believe that. So I think differently. I find it also contradictory that a God would want to create me and then say your time is capped. I'm not I'm not down with that. Like, that makes me mad. So your time is capped because you have to be reincarnated. Like, if I was created, then I would expect that and hope that that creator would want to, give me the freedom to choose what I wanted. Maybe I want to die at 50. Maybe I want to die at 500. I should be able to choose that timeline, not have it dictated to me like I'm a child by a, supernatural force.
I agree with Michael's perspective, and I would add on also that maybe having a very, very long lifespan could be a way to actually level up in reincarnation. Maybe you can do so much in that one life that you just catapult ahead and reincarnate in a much, much better life because you've got so many, I don't know, so much karma. You managed to accrue so much karma in that one life that you artificially elongated. Maybe it's not necessarily bad to have a long life, even in the context of reincarnation.
And also, maybe it's not artificially elongated either. Like maybe we just figure this out. Maybe that's not artificial, and maybe the original intention was for us to figure this out. Like maybe that's what that creative force, that God, has always wanted us to figure out, and how to do these, spiritual evolutions in our lifetime. I mean, I think we all have had spiritual lessons in this lifetime. So multiply that out 1,000 years. I don't know.
So, Daniel, just to address your point, I guess the idea is that maybe you might be able to extend life very, very long, and then you die, and therefore you can continue the process of reincarnation. The point that I was making was regarding extending life indefinitely, and therefore you can't continue the process. So, so you might be right, but it doesn't really affect the argument that I was giving.
Even if we manage to totally treat aging, we're all going to die someday when the sun expands and destroys Earth, or if we are on another planet, something will happen there eventually. Or eventually you'll be murdered by someone. I mean, this probability says that, giving a longer time frame, something bad's going to happen to you.
Yeah, something bad's going to happen to you for sure. I guess, but you won't be able to get, suppose that you do live till the end of the universe, you won't be able to be reincarnated because there's nothing right to reincarnate into.
You could be reincarnated into another universe.
This isn't the only universe that exists. I mean, there are trillions upon trillions of universes. And if we're living hundreds of thousands, millions of years, technology will be so advanced, you just go somewhere else. No big deal. Sun dies here, big deal. I'm living in a different universe, no problem.
I mean, that would be great. We'll see. We'll see if that can. Well,
I don't know. Maybe you tired to think I might live that long, but anyway.
Right.
It would be nice.
So one question that I want to address before we move on is the question of squeezing the orange as much as possible, and whether there are better and worse ways to do that, and whether one of them could be just cryonics. Like you decide just to freeze your body, and this is one way of extending your physical body such that later on you'll be able to be revived and you'll be able to live in that future society. Is that like a proper way of squeezing the orange? Or do you think that really the right way to do is just to try to live as healthy of a life as possible? Because I feel like you do have those two options. And the argument, Michael, that you were giving seems to suggest that whichever works best is the one that we should go for, because it'll extend our life for longer.
Cryonics, though, was only like applied, like you die and you know what I mean? You apply for this while you're alive, but that it's like, okay, as soon as I die, I want to be, put in the deep freeze so that hopefully they can figure out it's not done before you die. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily squeezing the orange, I guess, because the orange is
fair enough. And I guess you think of cryonics in the case where you're not dead, but you're saying, okay, I want to live for as much as long up until this point, and I want to preserve my body in its current state, because later on there's a better chance that I'll get revived and I'll be able to squeeze the orange more. Not necessarily
wrong or right. I think it's every person's got to decide what's right for them. I mean, maybe if you're in some chronic.
Would you make that decision?
No, I don't think so. I mean, from where I stand now, no. Even if I, God forbid, develop Parkinson's or something like that, I still don't think the cryonics is not my thing. I'm not into that. But yeah.
What about you, Michael?
So I've thought about this a lot, not necessarily. And I know I said I don't think about death at all, but I mean, if I'm, what are the probability? If I'm dead, if I'm in the ground, I'm gone. That's it. I'm just bug food. That's not, I don't want that at all. So I've thought about this a lot. And the cryonics community has grown a lot over the past 20 years. I know people who have signed up for cryonics, they've made that bet. But my thinking on this is, money aside, that, let's assume, first of all, I've got to have the money saved up for, maybe this is a 500 year or 1,000 year or 2,000. I can't assume it's going to happen in the next 50 or 70 years that people are going to be revived, because there are people like Walt Disney and others, Ted Williams, who supposedly did cryonics, and they're on 50 years now and there's no revival. So I'm not hopeful. I'm just trying to be realistic. Now, the other side of that too is I have a 16-year-old, and if she chooses to reproduce at some point, then her kids and then maybe their kids. So I'll be a great-great-grandfather at some point at 120 years old or whatever, right? After that, I don't know, assuming I died, right, in terms of being revived. So I've got 3 generations that'll probably meet me and actually care enough, because if you don't meet me and you're in my DNA lineage, what do you care? I'm just a name on a piece of paper, right? That you're paying bills. And then, my great-great-great-grandkids may be like, why are we paying for this dude to be frozen? I don't even know him, right? So I basically have 3 generations, which could be, I don't know, depending on their lifespans, what, 300 years I'm looking at maybe in terms of being frozen. And then that's it, what? Pull the plug. So that's also a risk. And then the other part of that equation then too is it goes to this idea of, if there is, and I don't know what the answer is, if there is a reality beyond our consciousness, and I've artificially stopped that by freezing myself, Han Solo and Carbonite, have I cosmically myself, right? I don't know what the
I
answer
think
is.
about that all the time because,
Y-
like, I just remember, like, when my brother died, there was like this, like, I can it just felt like I would get this message, like, I'm not in that body, but I'm right here with you. What would happen if we had chosen to
Yeah.
cryogenically freeze him? Would he be stuck in some sort of, not purgatory, but, some sort of thing that his soul couldn't I think we have a lot to learn about the soul, and, hopefully we can, I don't know, hopefully we can in 500 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a big part of my thinking too, is not, if I died trying, that it is what it is, and I'm not going in the ground, and I'm not going to put myself in that cryonic prison and hope that someone in my DNA lineage will revive me at some point. I may just release myself back into that, you know, universal consciousness.
Yeah, for me, cryogenics is I'm not I'm not a very spiritual person, but I'm spiritual enough that cryogenics is outside of my comfort zone. And I think with modern technology, with social media, YouTube videos, we can at least leave some connection behind for our descendants. Imagine someone 200 years from now using ancestry.com or whatever service like that exists then, and they find your name, they look you up on YouTube, and they find a 200-year-old YouTube video of you talking. That's already really incredible.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I do want to tie this back to the afterlife question and whether or not what implication does it have for radical longevity if there is an afterlife or if there isn't. And it seems to me, and I want to get your opinions, that it raises the following question: if there's an afterlife, and might you consider that radical longevity isn't necessary?
Dave's
Da-
here.
Dave's here. Hello, Dave. Welcome. We're actually discussing the topic of the afterlife and what implications that has for radical longevity. So, do you think it's spiritually arrogant to be radically, if there's to go for radical longevity, if there is an afterlife, or at least unnecessary?
Oh, this is some really deep thoughts, having just awoke.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna
You
Do you want me to
wanna go?
jump in here? Yeah, yeah, let me
Yeah, Julie, go ahead.
no,
Go ahead.
like, let me just go, like, I feel like, I mean, again, in Christian religion, it's like we're taught that we're always like we're always messing up, basically. We're never gonna, like, and like the whole point of this lifetime is to, like, become as spiritually evolved in a human body that has desires and things that are not in line with, kind of like, for lack of a better way of saying it, love, like this love energy that's, love your neighbor as yourself and all of those things, right? But then it's like we do stupid things, we say mean things, or, or worse, we murder somebody. And, like, it seems like a lot of religions, the point of it, a lifetime, is to get it right here. So if you had 1,000 years or even eternity, like, it's almost like you could do all of that here. I don't see how going through some, but again, this comes down to beliefs, but I just don't see how going through a spiritual evolution would make it, like, all your punishment could be done here, just like karma teaches you, right? You put something out, it comes back to you. So I feel like a lot of those things would be done in this lifetime more effectively, but again, I only know this. I don't know the spiritual world. I just imagine the spiritual world as this sort of energy of pure love, and people don't murder each other, and they don't get to eat ice cream either. But, I don't know. Like, I think it can be done here.
Right. But for the purposes of this question, we were assuming that there is an afterlife, right? Even if your current life turns out to be the better one, you don't know that for a fact. So it seems like you're assuming more than what you could know.
I guess what I'm trying to say is actually choosing to live on this planet with, in this lifetime is actually spiritually tough. That's what I'm trying to say, is that
Okay.
that's my sense is that this would be spiritually easier to be without, this lifetime, and to be in this lifetime is like to choose it is like we're like the tough guys.
Dave, do you have something to add, or you were going to say something?
No, this reminds me of a story that I heard, and I wish I had committed it to memory so I'd be able to, elucidate it here. It's of two twins having a conversation in the womb, and they're wondering, is there life outside of the womb, right? Is there life after birth is the question that they're having. And they get in this philosophical debate because, one is like really gung-ho about there must be something out there. And the other's like, are you kidding? Come on, there's nothing out there. We're at one with mother. There's nothing outside of mother. Yeah. And so they have this debate, right? Because they truly believe what they believe. This is the kind of debate you're asking us right now. We only know what we know. We don't know what's on the other side. I believe there is something on the other side. And so to answer your question, I do think that trying to live forever, it's a fool's errand, right? It's not something that we really should be aspiring to. I mean, sure, if we have things that we want to do and accomplish in this world, in this life, absolutely. As long as we're still viable, we're still contributing to the world, we're still learning, we're still growing. Why not? Let's stick around as long as we possibly can and do the most that we can while we're here. But at some point, we're going to die. And we are going to experience that other side. It's like at some point we're going to be born and we're going to experience life outside of the womb. We don't really have a choice.
And actually, you touch on an interesting aspect here because it's the other side of the coin. I asked, suppose that there is an afterlife, but now let's suppose that there isn't an afterlife. Does radical longevity become an ethical imperative, which seemed to be some of what you were suggesting in your response, Dave? Must we preserve what little life we know we have? If there is no such thing as afterlife, really, death is the end. And does that really carry even more weight, the goal to extend life indefinitely? And does that make it less of a fool's errand in the sense that perhaps it really is the most valuable thing we can do, even if it's not obtainable?
It seems to me there is a natural order to things, right? I mean, we've seen it in science too, that there are people that the old guard really wants to hold on to the old ideas, and they're not open to any new ideas. And so the only way that we see any kind of radical change in science is the old guard has to almost die off before the new guard can take over, right?
Yeah, there's this famous quote, science advances one funeral at a time.
Yeah.
I love that.
And if we're all living forever, we might do ourselves an injustice of never, ever being able to have that old guard pass away and new ideas begin to take shape. We might just be stuck where we are today because nobody ever dies.
We're seeing this a little bit already with the fact that most of the most successful politicians are very old. They're from like a past generation, and they're not letting the younger guys go to the top and become the leaders. So it's something that
Don't count though.
Yeah.
They don't count. That's a different breed altogether.
well, but in any event,
We're talking about people are trying to do good. No, sorry.
right.
Okay, sorry.
But yeah, I guess we see that not just in science, but we see it in politics. We see it in all these different facets of humanity. And imagine if we had people who were 500 years old, 400 years old. I mean, it seems like it would be even more extreme in those sorts of circumstances. And it might be a disservice not just to, the current generation, but future generations as well.
Individual.
Go ahead.
Just a quick point. It's individual choice. And, if I want to choose to be some advanced older age and I'm not a detriment to society and I'm self-sufficient, if I am judged negatively for that, let some society try to tell me, right? I'm a big believer in individual choice. I don't like to be mandated. You can only live this long or that long. And if you do, then we're going to come for you. This just doesn't seem right. So
Yeah, I think the problems you've described, Saeed, can be solved through the right laws, the right social structures. Maybe, you could have on the politicians, mandatory semi-retirement where people take a break for a couple of decades before they can then run for office again. So that way you could still benefit from the experience of people who've lived a really long lifespan and have lots of wisdom while also making room for new people. I think those problems can be solved with the social organization capabilities that we have now that we're not using properly right now, but we could theoretically solve for.
Yeah, exactly. We're not using it properly right now. We have these tools at the moment, but they're not being deployed in the right way to solve like even minor versions of the problem that I'm suggesting. And think about not just generational renewal. Think about resource redistribution. Like the 500-year-old Elon Musk is going to be a force to deal with. To give you an example, so the people who are actually accumulating over all this very large expanse of time are going to have so much more power than the rest of the guys, and it'll lead to naturally it'll lead to a power concentration problem that we face today. And maybe one of the natural hedges on that problem is the lifespan limit. And maybe do we want to remove that hedge, make things even less equal? Just putting it out there.
This already exists. I don't want to live in a longevity communism where we all have to live a certain amount. There's always going to be a distribution of skills in the population where some are highly skilled. Most people on average are average skilled, and a few will be lower skilled. I'm not a fan of trying to level the playing field, equality of opportunity for, whether that's longevity or everything else. But I don't like the idea of someone telling me I can only live X. I'm going to find a place where I can live as long as I want to without that, that tyranny.
So suppose that we don't want you to live for less than you want, but rather we just want you to retire at a certain point.
I'll go somewhere else. I'll live in a cabin in the woods. Like, I'm not a fan of being told how to live my life. That's my choice.
I keep hearing like this like debate between like the ego and the soul, right? Like, I mean, if you think of a politician or Elon Musk, for like you're thinking of somebody with like just this super ego, and that super ego is going to just keep becoming bigger and bigger, and the soul part isn't going to evolve. Whereas, like, I guess I kind of hope, and I mean, I really hope in 1,000 years that we are a lot more capable of keeping that ego in check. I mean, certainly, like, that's something I've learned as I've gotten older is like, how to kind of put my ego in the background and live from kind of a little bit more of a soul's perspective or loving perspective, I suppose. And I just wonder, as a species, if we evolve that far, maybe it's no big deal to live that long because, you know, the ego doesn't grow. Maybe maybe that's like the positive benefit is, you just learn over so many decades how to kind of keep that ego in check and really live from this like soulful, loving perspective. And maybe it becomes aspirational to, somebody who's in their 40s to see somebody who's 500 and just how beautiful and easy their life seems because they do live from this other way. I mean, like you're assuming that like, and I would assume too, there would always be those people whose ego just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the longer they live. But, hopefully there would be a good chunk of people that would be evolving spiritually.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm not. I think that we have a population of human beings. They're right now 8 billion. It's expected to go to at least 10 billion by 2050. And out of these 10 billion, maybe some of them live for 150 to 100 years. And then my question, I guess, what I'm proposing is that some of them will be very power hungry. Will try to live for longer. Will try to accumulate power, and therefore they're gonna have like they're gonna basically concentrate much of the power for them and for their purposes. And then the rest of the people who are evolved, who are not seeking power in the same way, well, even that would be like a good way to evolve as from a personal growth standpoint. And I agree with you at that point. That would be just a small fraction of the population. And this other small fraction will have like an unwieldy influence over the rest of the population if you allow them to accumulate power for as long as 100 and 300 years. So I was just putting that as like, well, if we think into that future where we have people who are 500 and 400, are those people likely to be these saints or like Buddha-like figures, or are they likely to be like a Donald Trump-like figure? I'm not saying either of those is the case, but it seems to be that one possibility presents a risk that it's worth considering in terms of like thinking of that future where there are these longevity these people with radically extended lifespans. And it's just something to consider in terms of like what does this look like really in reality, because we're not living it right now. So that's kind of like the purpose of the thought experiment.
are you sure we're not living it right now? I mean, maybe not in terms of longevity, but power is concentrated in the hands of the few. It's been like that for thousands of years. It'll probably always be like that. Now, then the question is it concentrated in a few for the good of the many or at the detriment of the many, right? So hopefully society evolves where it's always going to be at the good of the many and not at the detriment of the many. But someone living longer, 500 years, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the dominant theme and imposing a fascist lifestyle onto others. I mean, people can choose to do what they want in their own lives, right?
I guess, yes, we're living the power imbalances currently. The question is, are those going to be made more extreme if you have people who can accumulate power for longer? It seems like the natural response is yes to that question.
Is it for good or for bad though? That's the challenge.
That is a challenge. That is a challenge. Hopefully, it is for good. And the question is, can we structure society in such a way that that doesn't happen? Clearly, the current structure that we have now is not up to the task. In order to have like the best outcome for these individuals that are hundreds of years old, for this future where there are these human beings, we need to also restructure society in the right way that'll offer the right sort of check and balances on these powers and distributes freedom in the right way and doesn't let others curtail the freedom of those who don't have enough.
That makes me nervous. That makes me nervous
Yeah,
putting limits on it. Now you start to get into censorship and longevity censorship or what?
longevity communism. That's the quote right there. I love
Yeah.
that. Like, we don't need longevity communism. Like, I think, I don't know, there's just always been good and evil. There always will be good and evil. And, at certain times the evil is winning and at certain times the good is winning. And I would just hope that, like, again, that somebody who's living that long has just had their ego sort of gets smaller and smaller, and this kind of more evolved being gets greater and greater. And I, maybe that's a very naive outlook, but that would be I would just think that's the natural inclination that people just get better think, I don't know.
So
I don't know of many, like, where you say, like, mean there are a few mean old people, but, that have all this, maybe they have all this power, but they seem to be few and far between. It seems like as people get older, they get wiser and they get kinder. That's just, to me, in general, that's the way I see it. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe I don't really know them, but I don't.
So you're picturing a wiser, kinder Adolf Hitler or Genghis Khan?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, honestly, like, I was sitting there, I was thinking in my head, like, okay, well, if Adolf Hitler, like, didn't die, would he have evolved in some way? I don't know. Would some equal, because, like, these guys that are, like, all power hungry, or people that are power hungry, I'm not gonna say just men because we were just talking about Martha Stewart, like, so somehow something always happens, like, that some other, like, high ego force, they end up doing battle with themselves and kinda taking themselves out. So, I don't know, like, they kinda self-destruct to a certain degree.
the the example of Genghis Khan is actually really good because he wanted to prolong his life and avoid death. And towards the end of his life, he brought a Buddhist monk to his court to try and help him prolong his life. And the Buddhist monk told him, I think he told him that you need to abstain from sex, abstain from alcohol, and only eat vegetables or something like that. And Genghis Khan wasn't willing to do any of that.
Yeah, so that actually touches on
Played him too, but anyway.
that
Around and listened to him, but just didn't follow any of his advice.
so that touches on a question that I had for you guys. Like, how is it really worthwhile to avoid death, no matter the cost? So some people take a look at the Netflix documentary where there's of Brian Johnson and the Don't Die movement, and they see his lifestyle and his schedule and his devotion to trying to extend life for as long as his life for as long as possible. And some people might say, well, is that really a life worth living where you can't have these simple pleasures? Say if it's just the right sweets or the meal that you love or other sorts of activities that he has this very tight schedule. Some people would say, is it really worth that much of a sacrifice?
So when I hear that argument, it always makes me think, man, there must be some people out there that really, really love sweets and alcohol.
Chocolate.
Yeah, and
I'm not giving up ice cream.
sweets for everyone, of course. But for me, I don't really crave those things. I guess I'm blessed in that way. So it's an easy choice for me to make. I'll definitely limit or cut out entirely things that are unhealthy to have a longer, healthier life. If I really crave
we can change. So yeah, this is just one example in terms of like food, for instance. But for instance, what about doing like extreme sports, things that put you in danger of dying through some accident because you like the adrenaline rush, or doing certain kinds of drugs? So the idea is that there are certain experiences that people covet that do have these bad effects and do put you closer to death per se. But you would be just eliminating all of that from life. And some people might say, well, that's actually part of what I find to be very valuable about life, and I'm removing that part in order to live for longer in a world where I will no longer have those experiences form part of my life. So it's kind of like, is that really the right trade-off?
Well, it's a balancing act because you have to enjoy life too. So if I was just seeking to exclusively maximize longevity, then if you take that to the extreme, I would just stay home all the time, just working out and eating veggie bowls, and I wouldn't go out of my house because I don't want to die in a car accident. And so, but there's really diminishing returns at that point. I think for me, I try to do the things that provide the most return at a reasonable cost. And then when I do incur some costs, like go drive to leave my house to see a friend, I'm taking a risk there, I might die. The gain I get from that, the social interaction, more than outweighs, I think, the risk of dying in the car.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be people who judge whether it's a longevity athlete or anybody. And to be honest, I couldn't care less. If they want to go and eat bags of this and bags of that, that's their choice, right? If they can't make that commitment, that's fine. To make the analogy, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, you don't get to the top of the mountain to be the best in your field by casually going after something. You've got to dedicate your whole life to it. And whether it's Brian or me or anybody here, we're dedicated to this, right? So, and now even there's a gradient of it. Do you have to go to the extreme of Brian or even to the extreme of someone like me? That's the individual can choose that if they don't or they do, right? But I just, this mindset of, oh, I can never do that, I'm losing this or that. They'll never be the best at anything with that mindset.
Yeah, so I guess, but the main point though is that there, at the end of the day, is a trade-off, because you want to extend a life that's worth living, right? And what makes it worth living to you can vary from one person to the other. So I guess the main point here is that if really extending life, is that really all that there is to life, extending it, and that's all that takes up all of your time? It seems a little bit counterproductive at that point. That's kind of like the point that I would highlight. Not so much whether some people should do it or not, but that there inherently is this trade-off.
So if Nikola Tesla spends all day, every day, sciencing away, most people would probably see that as a waste of life. He's not socializing. He's not doing all the things that the regular people do, but he's doing what he loves, right? So if the longevity-minded person is doing what they love, and it happens to be that they spend less time socially or looking at the buildings in a different city or a different state, if that's their choice and that makes them happy to science away all day, every day, who is to judge that, right? Now, that said, I'm not going to impose my lifestyle or anyone else's lifestyle on someone else. People can choose how much or not to take of this approach, right? So
that's interesting. So would you say so this is a question to everyone here. Would you say that you love the longevity athlete lifestyle,
Yeah,
and that's why you do it?
exactly. It's not a sacrifice. Like, I don't feel like I'm sacrificing anything. Now, I mean, if I did it in a manner that wasn't my style, like, I think we all kind of have a little bit of a different style. So like Brian's way of eating, like that would be a huge sacrifice for me. So like I'm, going to follow the literature and come up with a way that works for me. And, you know, although we kind of hopefully have the same end result, like I live to eat, so that's really important, and my food has to be like really good, and I'm not going to eat the same thing every single day. That would be a sacrifice to me to eat, you know, like the same thing every day. But it's not a sacrifice for me to figure out, hey, how can I do this in a way that works for me? It doesn't feel like a sacrifice. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, like kind of to go back to Daniel's example of like, would I not leave the house to go see a friend so that I didn't, so I suppose there's a tiny sacrifice, but just like he said, it's actually not, because you're figuring that social connection is going to outweigh, like your sacrifice is this big, but then the gain you get is this big. So it's like, I don't know, it from a mathematical perspective, it kind of wipes it out. It's not a sacrifice. So I don't, I think none of us feel like we're making sacrifices or we wouldn't keep living like this.
What about you, Dave? What do you think?
Man, I had so many different points I wanted to jump in on, but I've lost some of them. Going back to the eating the same foods every day, for example, that's not even a wise thing to do because you can generate food sensitivities. I found this out the hard way. I eat mushrooms every single day, and now I've developed a food sensitivity to them. The people that are probably doing that diet where they're eating, Brian's food plan are inadvertently giving themselves food sensitivities they're not even aware of. So you can do very healthy things all the time, but when you do them in extreme, they become unhealthy. So if you're living to chase longevity, you can probably end up doing really dumb things that are not going to help your longevity. And let's be honest here. All of the things that we do as rejuvenation athletes, they're increasing our health span. They're not really doing anything for our longevity, right? That hasn't been really invented yet for us to be able to live beyond 120 years, right? We're still waiting for some scientist somewhere to come up with this. The only thing that we are capable of doing is increasing our health span. And that's what we're all doing because we're all really into health span. We're into doing the best that we can with what we have. We like to live and look younger as we get older. We want to still feel vibrant and still be able to go and do all the things that we did at 30, at 80 or 90 years old, if that's even possible. And if it's possible, this is the group that's going to find out because we're dedicating ourselves to doing that. But I don't think that anything that we're really doing right now is going to increase our longevity, just our health.
Well, guys, Michael, Daniel, maybe Julie, oh, she left. Do you agree that what you're doing right now is not helping with longevity or lifespan?
I mean, I disagree a little bit, but I agree with most of what Dave said. But only the disagreement would be that by doing the things that promote health span, we are probably pushing our endogenous longevity out. So if your DNA says under the best conditions you would die at 80, without this lifestyle, I'd probably be dead at maybe, I don't know, 60, 65, 70. So now technically you're extending or you're maximizing, you're back to the squeezing the orange, right? So will we get beyond 120? I don't know. But live long enough to live forever.
Yeah, I agree. I think by seeking to maximize health span, you are going to also increase your lifespan. Whether you can actually get past, I don't think you can get past your maximum lifespan defined by your genetics with the interventions that we have available to us, or that the casual person has available to them right now. Maybe we don't know for sure, but I would be skeptical. But I think, yeah, by seeking to maximize your health span, you are going to indirectly also increase your lifespan.
Okay, and we would say definitely that compared to 20 or 30 years ago, we have many more tools to that effect currently that might be able to extend longevity and lifespan according. But we don't know for sure.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
The maximum lifespan in a mouse is without calorie restriction is 40 months. The best interventions get a little bit beyond that. But sorry, let me go back. Calorie restriction and a couple of other interventions get the maximum lifespan of a mouse to 50 months. Nothing's beat that over the past 50 years. Rapamycin is less than 50 months. Growth hormone receptor knockout mice is around 50 months, but no one wants to live, like and whether it translates to people is another story.
Yeah,
So,
I was gonna touch on that question, and it is something that I wanted to address at least briefly. There are two sets of issues that I've encountered with respect to longevity research. One of them is the question of aging. What is it exactly? It seems to be a diffuse process that affects different tissues in different ways. And the idea of figuring out a single intervention that would somehow stop or reverse aging, or having the right kind of collection of interventions, that makes the actual target of developing the relevant technology much further away, given just the nature of the process, this diffuse bodily process. The second issue is that even though there are certain things that work in animal models, the ratio of conversion of things that work in animal models versus human beings is tiny. It's a tiny fraction. I don't remember the specific number, but it's a really small fraction. So how confident are we that, the fact that in certain animal studies that we have seen these effects, and that'll be something that translates into humans. So there are these two issues, and I'm not saying that these are necessarily showstoppers at all, and I'm not saying that the research should not continue, but I am saying that that does bring a much higher level of uncertainty that as to whether or not this will succeed and whether or not we will actually be able to extend longevity and lifespan accordingly. And is that something? Are you just hopeful that this will work, or do you just set aside the uncertainty? How does the uncertainty work into your conviction and your dedication to your longevity extension project?
I'm in a different boat on this. So everything you said is true. So taking, so if a given intervention works in mice, and a large segment of the quote unquote anti-aging community are taking those, whether they're drugs or megadosing supplements, they're taking that for that purpose. Now, that could be short-sighted, right? Because does it even work? So the core of what I do is regular testing biomarkers, right? So aging is a biological process, right? And it can be tracked. So if you're tracking markers of liver, kidney, immune, all of the major organ systems, then you can see if a given intervention, whether it worked in mice or not, is doing anything for you. And then you can decide if you want to keep that intervention or not. And then even taking out the supplements and the drugs, that applies to everything. How much exercise, how much food, which types of food, high fat, high this, high vitamin, high mineral, whatever, to identify the user's manual for you that slows your rate of aging. And I'm not talking about taking a Dunedin pace test or one test a year. I'm talking about many tests per year. And this is the science of it, where you're actually tracking physiological processes with markers of every organ system. Now, will that get you to super longevity? For me, I can't think that it makes sense that you're maximally minimizing risk of disease and giving yourself the best chance to live as long as physically possible. It's removing the error in that equation and hope.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess your response is like, well, you just need to gather evidence about your interventions in real time as many times as possible. Just get more evidence, more evidence. And that seems to me to be the right answer. I agree with your earlier comment. You just, as you get more information, you can become more confident, and therefore you can minimize uncertainty for sure. Julie?
Yeah. But also what's great about Michael's way of doing it is like what works for Michael may not work for me. Certain interventions, specifically like we're talking diet, different DNAs respond differently to different diets. There's no one diet that works for everybody. So having that kind of just that self-testing that, quote unquote, what I think of as biohacking, putting in an input, then testing to see if it worked. Like, we've come these N of one of experiments that hopefully, hundreds of years from now, we all learn as a society from each other because of these N of one experiences. And like maybe at some point we can say, oh, my DNA is similar to hers in this way. So then therefore these diets and these interventions are going to be better. And, my DNA is more like Michael's. I think we'll figure this out.
So I want to draw a parallel with what we were discussing earlier with respect to social evolution and how death is sometimes very important, so that new ideas come into the population, new people assume leadership roles, and therefore there can be social progress. But there's actually another sort of evolutionary process that really depends on death a lot, and that's biological evolution. And it's interesting to consider if, as a species, we're able to achieve longevity such that the members of the population really don't change very much. They just add to them. So you don't have this selection effect working on the population. And that can, from an evolutionary perspective, affect the course of human evolution such that our descendants might just be very similar to us, even if we go millions of years into the future. Just to give you an example. So death has been something that's very important in explaining the evolution of life on Earth. And is that something that we really want to intervene with in the case of human beings? Do we want to really, we've basically come about thanks to this process of natural selection. And as a matter of fact, there are these cyclical massive extinctions that some biologists argue are part of what led to the development of life as we know it currently. So are we also in a sense playing with fire, or a kind of like minimizing or inhibiting human potential that would naturally come about through a process of natural selection? And is that something that people should worry about if everyone becomes a longevity athlete, and it actually does successfully lead to indefinite lives.
I think you have to go back to this idea of like certain things would be sacrifices to some people. And I think there's always going to be the people that feel like they need their Cheetos, and to give up the Cheetos are going to be a sacrifice. So guess what? Like, in the evolution of like, I think as long as free choice is part of this, certain people are going to choose to be in longevity and certain people aren't. And so those are the stronger genes that are going to survive. There's still going to be that whole natural selection, because as long as people have free will to choose the lifestyle that they want, people are always going to choose. I mean, that's throughout history. People have chosen to drink and do drugs and, knowing that it's going to kill them earlier. And other people have chosen to live healthy. And I think that will continue. It's just that, the people that choose to live healthy might be living 500 years, and the people that choose to live unhealthy, maybe they're living, I don't know, 100 years or less, who knows? But
Well, I'd argue the opposite. Longevity in human longevity has not evolved. We haven't evolved to select for human longevity. Otherwise, the majority of the population would be interested in pursuing it. It's actually the other way around. What I can see happening is, people like us and others, maybe driving the field. Granted, maybe as in a small amount at first, but then play this forward 5 generations from now. Will more people than ever be interested in their health and longevity? And will continue to grow over time? Then now the average is the longevity athlete, of like us. So eventually that's going to be the norm. How many generations from now is unknown. So, but then the question is, when the average population catches up to what we're doing, what happens to people like us and what we're doing, right? Do you stay relevant? Do you choose a new career path? Because if you're 500 years old and, the average person knows what what you're just the average person now, right? So do you evolve and get better and find a new way to contribute to society, or do you do you leave and then choose to non-exist in this form? I mean, that's where this goes. That's where this natural selection of it goes.
I view natural selection as a really cruel process. Just think how much suffering our ancestors had to endure for us to be able to evolve, for us as a species to be able to evolve the kind of intelligence that humans have now. All the starving to death of less intelligent ancestral humans so that the more intelligent ones could reproduce. I think natural selection is a process that should be harnessed by humans to minimize the cruelty and then help direct it, because it's a semi-random process and it can result in all sorts of undesirable outcomes. It's not always a process that leads to what we would consider good outcomes.
Hitler.
And I don't even think that longevity is going to have much of an impact on natural selection. I think the bigger impact will come from embryo selection, embryo screening technologies, embryo editing technologies, which are already on the way. And when they do get here, I think their impact will dwarf any impact that that longevity enthusiasts could have on natural selection.
But would you be happy for that impact to take place from on the part of those technologies? Because you said that you wanted to harness the process.
What to an extent, yeah, I think a lot of good can come from it. I mean, the problem I see with natural selection arguments is that if we let natural selection take its course, it's a spectrum, right? When I was a baby, I had an ear infection. Maybe I should have died from that ear infection to better the species. Maybe my immune system wouldn't have made the cut, and I should have been culled through natural selection. So, but we gave me antibiotics as a baby. I'm alive today. It's a spectrum of decisions, and so I think when it comes to things like longevity or embryo selection, we'll have to have a careful conversation about the risk reward trade-offs. But I think there's a lot of good that could come from it. I think just leaving things to the natural course of natural selection, it results in uncertain outcomes with a lot of suffering in the process.
So with respect to natural selection, it's important to keep in mind that it's a mechanism that operates over thousands, hundreds of thousands of generations. So because of that, it's really something that you can think of at the level of a population. And what you see is that you see different traits, different features distributed in different ways that can be inherited by the next generation. And depending on those that survive to reproduce, those traits will be reflected in the following generation. And then that can basically the traits that are successful and are adaptive are the ones that spread across the population. And those are the traits that are more adaptive. I mean, so the result is adaptation of the application of natural selection. And whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, I would say it's a good thing in the sense that you're the one that reaches adulthood and gets to reproduce, finds a mate and reproduce. And that's what determines what the genetic composition of the next generation will be. But it does seem to me that you're veering a little bit off into the question of eugenics, right? Isn't there a bit of a eugenic component to that? And I was wondering, is that something that people should aspire to? I know that there are certain gene therapies that allow or help with longevity, but to what degree? Like, do you draw a line somewhere where you say, no, this kind of intervention is not acceptable, even if it's going to give me 5 or 10 more years?
Well, I think a gene therapy on a consenting adult, if they want to do it and they can give informed consent, then let them try it, assuming it's gone through appropriate trials, or they've signed, or they know that there hasn't been trials and they've signed away their acknowledgement of that. When it comes to embryos, that's a whole other can of worms that we don't probably have time to talk about here. But I think, being able to, if we could somehow eliminate genetic diseases, that would be a great outcome.
I know there's a startup that's working on developing the technology to do that. Apparently, we have all of the ingredients to create that technology, and that would be very interesting. What's interesting there is that the changes are not things that are going to affect necessarily the genetic composition of the next generation. So it's not something that really operates at the level of natural selection yet. But it's a very interesting example. Dave, I feel like you have something to say.
Well, I was just thinking that so far the gene therapies that have been developed don't affect our germline. I think that's intentional so far. But I have a feeling that after a while, once gene therapy becomes normalized, gene therapy that does affect germline is just going to be the next evolution. I don't think there's going to be any way to avoid that.
Or two, if the cycle of natural selection slows down, because I mean, just as a woman, if someone told me you're going to live 500 years and I could choose to have a baby at, I don't know, 60, like I'm not having a baby at 16, 18. I'm not, there's no like clock going, oh my God, like you got to have a kid, so that I would hope that that would give people a little bit more freedom to live a little longer, but that would mean that that natural selection cycle might, double in length or more.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually. That seems like a very likely sort of reaction. And then the question is, what if people end up, suppose we get to this generation in the future where almost everyone is like a longevity athlete and everyone can reproduce whenever they decide across their life. What if we postpone it for too long? What if most people postpone it and then people get picked off by accidents? And then we get to a point where individuals were trying to survive for as long as possible. And as a result, the species goes extinct.
Wait, so
That would be an extreme end.
there's going to come a time where if someone gets hit by a truck and they're just laying there dead for, I don't know, minutes to hours, sure, there's brain cell death, that happens every second that your brain isn't getting oxygen. But it's only a matter of time before the brain can be regenerated, even in conditions like that, where someone has been dead for some amount of time. Now, would they be the same full person that they were before, as we talked about earlier? Probably not, but better that than not existing, I'd say. So
Also, there is you on a number of occasions you've said, Michael, oh, eventually this is going to happen. But then the question is, what if it doesn't happen at the right time? What if it would have happened if we had proceeded in a different way? If we say in this scenario that I'm giving, like, what if we go extinct before that has a chance of happening? So it might be true that eventually it would happen if we continue to exist. But that's part of the question.
it's just a fact. I mean, is it 50 years? Is it 500 years? It's eventually there will be a time in human history, assuming it doesn't extinguish itself, that if it's not human history, then it'll be whatever the next evolution of the species on this planet is that can live beyond how long human civilization has gone on for. Eventually, there will be, and to play it even back further, the Earth is how many billion years old? Be a billion years old. We assume we're the first intelligent species that's been on the planet and gotten to this point, but maybe that's not the case. And then you'll say, where's the fossil record? Maybe we just haven't discovered it yet. I don't know.
Pyramids.
So to your question of
Could be.
Are you asking a question such as, at some point we may be able to upload our brains into something mechanical that could go ahead and think and exist for us forever? But would that still be us, right?
Yeah.
We still as a physical body are going to pass away, but yet if our brain processes are still running somewhere in a cloud someplace, are we really getting the benefit from that? I mean, that'll be a simulated thought process of ours that's still existing, but we aren't going to see that benefit because we're going to pass.
Yeah.
Right.
And even if it's like a perfect simulation, it seems like the natural conclusion is that it would just be a copy of you. It would not be you in those sorts of circumstances. And then there's this other question: do we really want to live? Suppose that so there's this famous thought experiment by Robert Nozick called the experience machine. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, but the idea is that you're presented with the option of entering the experience machine. It's like this chamber that's filled with water. You get hooked up, and you're given a pill to forget that you made the decision to enter the experience machine. But what does that experience machine do? It gives you all of the experiences of achieving all of the goals that you had at the moment that you created, that you took that decision. And you would basically think that you're achieving everything. You've lived a 500, in your case, like a 500-year life. That might not be the case. It might not correspond to reality, but it'll feel that way. It'll be indistinguishable from reality, from your point of view. Would you take the pill, or would you rather just, fend for yourself in reality, try to achieve your goals and achieve your goals in the real world where, there's a risk that you might fail? Or would you take the pill where it would be indistinguishable from success, but it wouldn't really be success because you wouldn't really be doing anything? You would just be in this tank being fed experiences.
Do we know that our current existence isn't that?
Are we in our womb? We're back to that womb story.
Right. Do we know? I guess not. We really don't know, in the sense, and not in the sense of like we can rule out the possibility that it's not the case.
Are you sure?
I don't think we can rule it out. No, I
Yeah.
think that it's pretty, because you can have, just theoretically, there are these scenarios. What evidence could you use to tell that you're not a brain in a vat right now? Like,
No, we're a brain in a skull right now. We're only getting sensory input from like eyes and fingertips, and those could be artificial for all we know.
I mean, maybe we don't even know that we're a brain in a skull in that case, right? Maybe we're something else completely different. Maybe we're a simulation, some sort of supercomputer by some beings that are much more superior to us. So there are so many scenarios that we just don't have enough evidence to rule out. So I would say that we don't know that for a fact. But setting aside that sort of skeptical worry, I guess the point is, like, would you rather live a life where it's just a simulation, where you seem to achieve everything that you've set for yourself, or actually a life where you're this embodied creature who's attempting things that they might fail at?
Yeah,
What do you think would be better?
if everything came easy, I don't think it would be worth living, right? I
We
think
need that hormesis, right? Isn't that like good for longevity? Like we need a little bit of just a little stressors. Those are actually good for longevity. So to be put in a vat and achieve everything, that kind of defeats the purpose of longevity, which, we always need a little bit of pressure to create the diamond kind of thing.
I think I'm not even sure we'd have free will, so I don't even know how to answer the question. I'm still thinking.
And I have a different perspective completely. Death is a prison that I don't like to, be in that at all. But then let's assume that I've removed that prison. Well, now being stuck on this rock is a prison. Being stuck in this universe, not having freedom of movement to go wherever I want, whenever I want, is a prison. So, it's lots to do.
Yeah. So basically, you would not you would not enter the experience machine, is what I feel you're suggesting.
We're probably already in it.
Okay. Dave, you had something else, and then I have a final question for the three of you.
I was just going to say, I think it's just in the striving for things that our achievements actually become valuable to us. Again, if everything came easy, we wouldn't appreciate anything. But if we have to strive for it, like we're striving for longevity and we're eventually going to achieve longevity, we're going to feel more proud in that than if it was just something that just came naturally that we didn't even have to try for.
Perhaps along those lines, would you say that an acceptance of death might bring peace and purpose?
To me, it does.
Okay. Michael?
Man, I don't even like those three words, acceptance of death. I don't even want to think about it like that. It's I enjoy life. I don't want that to diminish in any capacity, and I'm fighting like hell to keep it like that. If this thing that you call death comes around at some point, well, I died trying to do all the things I want to do.
I know about yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to try my best with the information and the tools I have to live as as healthy and long as possible, a decade at a time. And ultimately, if and when death comes, then I'll just accept it, and hopefully there's another fun stage of the journey after that.
So then here's my final question for the group. Is it better to focus on extending life or deepening the meaning of the life that we have already? In the case of you three as longevity athletes, my impression is that you do get a lot of meanings of life by actually engaging in the longevity athletes activities and all that. And that's, you guys love it, you guys enjoy it, you guys live it. And in your case, it's not really a dichotomy. By virtue of pursuing one, it seems to me you're also deepening the meaning of life. But for many people, that's not the case. And for many people, they might see it as an actual dichotomy between extending life or actually deepening its meaning. And my question to you, like, what is your sort of advice for them? Obviously, they're going to make their own decision, but the idea is that, given your perspective and what you guys are doing now, what input can you offer to that decision making process?
Well, for me personally, I try to automate all of my longevity practices so that I don't have to think about them, that they just become a habit. And that way I can focus on living my life. I can be out doing things with friends, enjoying life to its full, and not be distracted all the time about thinking about, oh, I have to do this to live longer.
I would say find the things that that can give you the most return on your investment for longevity, that that require the less cost from you, and start implementing those. And then once you get results from those, build on those, go outside your comfort zone, and take it one step at a time. It's a journey. You don't have to do everything at once. And I think by doing it more and more, it becomes easier and easier.
Michael,
So I-
final words.
So I don't have advice for that, for the those types. I have a different approach, which is if you like my Forrest Gump approach, get in the race and let's chase longevity.